For as long as I can remember, the family table had always been mine. It wasn't just a place to eat. It was where birthdays were celebrated, prayers were whispered, and where my children learned the meaning of unity. At the head of that long, polished wooden table, I sat not as a queen, not as someone seeking power, but as a mother, guiding, listening, and making sure every heart under my roof felt safe and loved. That chair was never just furniture. It was a symbol, a reminder of the years I had given, of sacrifices I had made, of nights I had gone hungry so my children could eat, of dreams I had quietly tucked away so theirs could come alive. And every time I took my place there, my children would look at me with a respect that warmed my weary heart. But that warmth, it began to fade. It started subtly, with whispers of laughter between my children and their wives at the far end of the table. I told myself it was nothing. They were young, they had their own ways. But slowly I noticed how their eyes shifted, not toward me but toward her, my daughter-in-law. She was beautiful, confident, and outspoken. I didn't mind that. In fact, I had welcomed her into our family with open arms. I wanted her to feel loved, to know she was one of us. Yet one evening, as we gathered for dinner, something in the air felt different. My son pulled out her chair with a flourish, as though she were royalty. My daughters giggled, nodding approvingly as she began to speak. She didn't just make small talk. She directed the conversation, asked questions, told stories that drew their admiration. And as I quietly served food onto their plates, I realized no one was listening to me anymore. My words slipped into the silence like stones sinking into water. I brushed it off that night. "They're young," I whispered to myself. "They mean no harm." But as days passed, the glances grew bolder, the admiration louder. My place at the table, the place where I once anchored the family, suddenly felt optional. And then came the look, a fleeting exchange between my eldest and his wife, quick, almost hidden, but sharp enough to pierce me. It was a look that said, "Her time has passed." I forced a smile, though my chest tightened with unease. I told myself I was imagining things, that no one could ever strip me of the respect I had earned over a lifetime of sacrifice. Yet deep inside, a seed of fear was planted, a fear that perhaps the role I had carried for so long, the role of being the heart and head of my family, was slipping through my hands like sand. That night, as I cleared the table alone, I paused at the head chair. My fingertips brushed the worn wood, and for the first time it felt cold beneath my touch. Something was changing. And I wasn't sure I was ready for it, but little did I know. This was only the beginning of my fall from the very table I had built with my own hands. The next family dinner came sooner than expected. It was a Sunday, the day we had always kept sacred for togetherness. I rose early, as I always did, preparing the dishes my children loved, the ones they used to beg for when they were little. The kitchen was filled with the familiar aromas of spiced lentils, roasted chicken, and freshly baked bread. Cooking for them had always been my language of love. As I laid everything out with care, I told myself that perhaps I had been overthinking, that maybe my children hadn't meant to make me feel small the other night. Surely, once we sat together, things would return to how they'd always been. The head chair was waiting for me, as it always had, polished and sturdy at the end of the table. But when everyone arrived, something felt off from the moment the door opened. My son walked in first, his wife beside him, her arm looped through his as though she were leading him, not the other way around. My daughters followed, carrying chatter and laughter that seemed to circle around her rather than me. They barely noticed the spread I had worked on since morning. We gathered at the table. I moved toward the head chair out of habit, out of tradition, out of my rightful place. But just as I reached for it, my son's voice cut through the air. "Mom?" he said gently, almost too gently. "Why don't you sit here instead?" He gestured toward a chair further down, while his other hand pulled out the head chair for his wife. I froze. My breath caught between my lungs and my throat. Surely I had heard wrong. Surely this was some kind of mistake. My eyes darted to him, then to her. She stood there with that polite smile, the kind that barely hides triumph. My daughters watched too, their eyes glimmering with an unspoken approval. I forced a small laugh, trying to mask the sting. That's my seat, son. You know I've always sat there, but instead of returning the chair to me, his smile tightened. Yes, Mom, but times are changing. She's the one keeping the family together now. You should rest. Let her take the responsibility. The words sliced through me sharper than any knife. Rest? Responsibility? Hadn't I carried this family through storms they couldn't even remember? Hadn't I been the one awake at midnight when they were sick? The one who sewed torn uniforms? The one who worked tirelessly so they could eat, study, dream? Yet here I was, being told to step aside, as if I were a tired old relic in the way of their bright new world. My hands trembled as I looked at my daughters, silently begging them to intervene. But they only nodded, whispering, "Yes, it's better this way. Let her lead now. She's so modern, so confident." And so, before I could gather the strength to protest again, my daughter-in-law lowered herself into the chair that had always been mine. She sat tall, her chin raised slightly, her smile painted with victory. Everyone else followed suit, laughing, talking, eating, while I sat silently in my new place, staring at the chair that had been stolen from me. The food tasted like ash in my mouth. Each bite I swallowed burned with humiliation. I kept my eyes lowered, not wanting them to see the tears threatening to spill. That night, after everyone had left, I lingered by the table. The head chair sat pushed back, empty now, but I could still see her silhouette there, commanding, glowing in their eyes. My place, my symbol of honor, gone, just like that. And as I stood there in the quiet, one thought echoed through me with a hollow chill. If they could take my seat so easily, what else might they strip from me next? In the days that followed, I tried to pretend nothing had changed. I still cooked, I still cleaned, I still held the home together like I always had. But inside I carried a wound no one else seemed to notice. Every time I walked past the dining table, that empty head chair mocked me, reminding me that it was no longer mine. I told myself not to dwell on it, that perhaps my children were just trying to make their wives feel more included. Maybe it was only temporary. Maybe they would realize their mistake. But deep down, a heaviness sat in my chest, whispering that something far darker was taking root. One evening, after another family gathering, I was tidying up when I heard hushed voices drifting in from the living room. I moved quietly, careful not to disturb them. My son was speaking, his voice low but firm. She's just old-fashioned, you know? Always clinging to traditions that don't fit anymore. My wife, she understands how families work today. She knows how to take charge. My heart thudded against my ribs. Old-fashioned? Traditions that don't fit? Then my daughter chimed in, her tone almost mocking. It's true. Mom doesn't even understand half the things we talk about anymore. She's sweet, but she's outdated. People respect confidence now, not old ways. A faint giggle followed, my daughter-in-law's giggle, light and triumphant, as though my children had handed her a crown. I gripped the wall to steady myself. Outdated. Sweet. Those were words people used when they wanted to erase you without sounding cruel. Words meant to soften the blow of betrayal. I had spent my entire life pouring myself into them, teaching them right from wrong, showing them the value of respect. And now, the very children I had raised were mocking me behind my back, praising a woman who had only just walked into their lives as though she were the foundation of our family. The voices grew softer, but one sentence pierced through the quiet like a knife. She's better at leading than Mom ever was. Better? My throat tightened. My knees threatened to buckle. I pressed my palm over my mouth, stifling the sob clawing its way up my chest. How easily they dismissed me. How quickly they had forgotten. I retreated silently, my steps light, careful, as though I were the intruder in my own home. Back in the kitchen, I sank into a chair, the tears I had held back finally spilling down my cheeks. I wanted to believe I had misheard, that my children couldn't possibly be so cruel. But the words rang in my ears, each one a brand on my heart. They no longer saw me as the head of the family. They no longer valued the traditions I had nurtured. In their eyes, I had become replaceable. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every moment of sacrifice I had made for them. Every night I stayed up nursing fevers, every coin I saved for their education, every prayer I whispered when life seemed uncertain. I had given them everything, and yet in return they handed my legacy to someone else. It wasn't just about a chair anymore. It was about respect, about being seen, about being remembered for the role I had played in shaping this family. And now, that role was being rewritten by a woman who hadn't endured a fraction of what I had. As dawn crept into the sky, one truth became clear. My children had betrayed me, not with open cruelty, but with quiet dismissal, the kind that cuts deeper than any harsh word. And while they may have thought I would accept it, bowing out gracefully into silence, they had forgotten one thing. A mother may bend, but she does not break. And if they had chosen to replace me, then they had awakened something within me that they were not prepared to face. From the moment she claimed the head chair, it was as though something in the air of my home shifted. My daughter-in-law no longer carried herself as a guest in my house. She moved with the ease of an owner, as though the walls, the traditions, even the people belonged to her. And my children, the very souls I had carried in my womb, stood by her side like loyal subjects. At first it was in small, almost invisible ways. She began directing where the dishes should be placed at the table, what should be cooked, and how it should be presented. "Oh, Mother, don't make so much butter in the bread," she would say with a smile. "It isn't healthy. We prefer it lighter." My children would nod in agreement, praising her modern thinking. I bit my tongue. Though my bread recipe had been handed down through generations, feeding their childhoods, their laughter, their very strength, they didn't remember that, of course. They only heard her voice, and to them her voice sounded like progress. Then she began dismissing the very traditions I had worked so hard to keep alive. The family prayers that used to begin each meal? She laughed them off, saying, "We don't need to be so old-fashioned. It makes dinners too formal." The small rituals of respect, like waiting for me to take the first bite, disappeared overnight. They would dive into their food before I had even sat down, their chatter drowning out the silence that grew inside me. Each evening, I felt myself shrinking more and more at the table I had once ruled with quiet dignity. My words were cut short, my suggestions ignored. Even when I tried to share stories from the past, my daughter-in-law would quickly redirect the conversation, speaking about business opportunities, new fashions, travel plans, topics my children devoured eagerly. One day, I watched as she reached across the table, tapping her manicured finger on the tablecloth. "We should redecorate this dining room. It feels too dated." My son glanced around, then nodded approvingly. "Yes, you're right. Mom, maybe it's time we gave the house a new touch." I looked at the walls, the curtains, the very furniture that had stood through years of storms and celebrations. Every corner of that room had a memory etched into it. Birthdays, holidays, even the nights we had nothing but lentils, yet still shared laughter. And here they were, calling it outdated. Her reign didn't stop at the table. She began dictating how the household was run, what groceries to buy, which festivals to celebrate, even how the family's money should be managed. My daughters followed her eagerly, praising her for being organized and smart. My sons obeyed her without hesitation, as if she were the compass guiding them into a brighter future. And me? I became a shadow in my own home. I tried to speak once, to remind them of the values I had raised them with. "Children," I said gently, "don't forget the roots from which you came. Traditions are what keep families strong." But my daughter-in-law cut me off with a laugh that was sweet yet sharp. "Roots are fine, Mother, but you can't live your whole life buried in the soil. We need to grow upward, not cling to the past." The words stung, but what stung even more was the way my children nodded in agreement, as if she had spoken some great wisdom I was too simple to grasp. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, realizing I was no longer the head of my family, not in body, not in spirit, not even in memory. My daughter-in-law wore the crown, and my children were happy to see it upon her head. But what they didn't realize was this. While they celebrated her reign, I was watching. Every move, every word, every subtle way she tightened her grip. And in my silence, I began to understand something important. She didn't just want the chair, she wanted everything that came with it. The power, the influence, the legacy. And as much as it tore at my heart to admit it, I could feel the storm brewing. This wasn't just about respect anymore. This was about control, and I knew deep within me that the day would come when her ambition would stretch beyond the table, when she would reach for something that even my children wouldn't be ready to give. That was when I promised myself I would be ready. The house always fell into a heavy silence after my children and their wives left. Once the laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the loud footsteps faded, I was left alone with the echo of my thoughts. I would walk past the dining table, my fingers brushing the edge of that cursed chair, and each time it felt as though I was caressing a wound that refused to heal. But on one particular night, long after the dishes had been washed and the rooms had quieted, I heard something unusual, a soft murmur of voices. At first, I thought it was just the wind seeping through the window frames. But then I caught it clearly. A whisper. A laugh. My son and his wife hadn't left yet. Curious and admittedly unsettled, I moved quietly through the hallway, my steps muffled by the old carpet. The voices grew sharper as I drew closer to the study room. The door was slightly ajar, light spilling out in a thin strip across the floor. I should have turned away. I should have respected their privacy. But my heart was hammering, and some instinct told me, whatever they were saying, it concerned me. I pressed myself against the wall and listened. Her voice came first, low and calculating. It's working perfectly. They already see me as the one in charge. Soon they'll forget she was ever the head of anything. My breath caught. She meant me. Then came my son's reply, a nervous chuckle. I know, but you have to understand, it's not easy. She's still my mother. Her laugh followed, soft, dismissive, triumphant. Mothers grow old, my love. Their time passes. But this family, this wealth, this legacy, it belongs to the ones who know how to use it. She's clinging to outdated ways. And you and I, we're the future. I felt the blood drain from my face. My son didn't protest. He didn't defend me. He didn't even hesitate. Instead, his voice softened. You're right. You're always right. I just need my sisters to fully see it too. Once they do, everything will fall into place. Her tone sharpened, more commanding now. Then make them see, because I won't stop at just the table. I want control over everything. This house, the finances, the family name, all of it. And if she keeps standing in the way, then she'll leave us no choice but to push her out completely. My knees nearly gave way. My own son, my own blood. Plotting with his wife to erase me not only from the table, but from the family itself. I pressed a trembling hand over my mouth, fighting the urge to burst into the room and scream at them. My body shook with rage, betrayal, disbelief. But another part of me, colder, sharper, told me to stay quiet, to listen, to learn, because in their arrogance they had revealed their true selves. And knowledge, I realized in that painful moment, was my only weapon. The conversation continued, my son whispering assurances, my daughter-in-law weaving her web of ambition tighter and tighter. The more I listened, the more I understood. She wasn't satisfied with respect. She wanted domination. And my children, my ungrateful children, were too blind to see that they were being led like lambs to slaughter. Finally, the light clicked off, and I hurried back down the hallway before they could catch me. In the darkness of my room, I sat on the edge of my bed, my hands clutching the blanket as if it were the only thing keeping me from collapsing. For the first time, the betrayal wasn't just an ache in my chest, it was a fire in my veins. My children had replaced me at the table. They had mocked me behind my back. And now they were conspiring to strip me of everything I had built. But they had made one mistake. They believed my silence meant weakness. They didn't know that a mother's silence can be the most dangerous thing of all. As I lay awake, staring into the shadows, a new thought burned inside me. If she wanted a war for the family's heart and legacy, then I would give her one. But it would not be fought with shouting or begging. No, mine would be a quiet war, fought with patience, proof, and timing. And when the moment came, she would learn that no matter how far children wander, no matter how much they forget, a mother is not so easily erased. The night I listened to them in the study, something inside me changed. It wasn't the kind of change that comes with a burst of fury. No, it was quieter, older, and far more dangerous. It settled like ice in my veins and then, slowly, melted into something colder. Resolve. If they thought my silence was submission, they had badly misjudged the price of my patience. At dawn, I rose with a new purpose. I kept doing the small, ordinary things, sweeping the floor, folding clothes, serving tea, because nothing alarms a predator like routine. But beneath the surface, I began to move. I watched how they handled the household, where papers were kept, which drawers never locked. I listened to the casual ways they spoke about money, about modernizing the estate. Every careless phrase became a thread I could pull. I started with what I knew best: memories and documents. Old bills, receipts, letters, things tucked away in the false bottom of the chest where my late husband used to hide coupons and promissory notes. I opened drawers I hadn't touched in years and found a map of our life: property deeds, the original will, a bank book with my husband's careful handwriting. As I turned these pages, the past spoke to me, reminding me what was mine and what could be taken if I let them. Then I watched. I watched my son in ways I never had before, not with a mother's indulgent eye, but with the careful attention of someone who needed the truth. He took phone calls in the garden, his voice low. He would leave documents on the coffee table and forget them when conversation picked up. Once, late at night, I found a pad of notes, numbers, names, transfers, scrawled in a hand I did not recognize. I tucked the notepad into my apron and smiled as if nothing had happened. Inside, my heart was racing. They had been sloppy. I reached out quietly to those who still cared enough to tell me things honestly. The old accountant who had kept our books before the bank took over. The neighbor who fed our parrot when we went away. The maid who had been with us when my children were small. I asked questions without accusation, just curiosity, the kind that raises few defenses. Little by little, their answers stitched together a pattern I had feared. Unexplained transfers into a new account, signatures I did not recognize, meetings held in cafes while I brewed their tea at home. One night, the maid, bless her honest soul, left a small envelope on my doorstep. Inside was a photocopy of a receipt, a down payment on a consultant for estate restructuring, signed by my son and, unmistakably, endorsed by my daughter-in-law. The paper was cold in my hand, but it warmed me with clarity. They were not merely reshaping the dining room. They were reshaping the ownership of our life. I learned to use their arrogance against them. They boasted of their modern ideas in front of my daughters, flaunting plans and whispering about trusts. They assumed I was too soft, too sentimental to understand the mechanics of money. So I learned them. I read late into the night. Bank forms, property law summaries, letters from solicitors I found in an old file stamped with my husband's name. Some of it was tedious. Some of it made my head swim. But every page I understood was another brick in the wall I was building. And I recorded, not with a device, for I had no wish to entangle myself in technicalities, but in the ledger of my memory. Dates, times, phrases. We'll move the assets under a trust. Once the name is changed, she won't have a say. I wrote them down on a small notebook I kept hidden inside the hymn book. Each entry read like a betrayal in black and white. More than paperwork, I collected witnesses. The neighbor who saw my son handing an envelope to his wife at the market. The bank clerk who remembered a suspicious transfer on a Tuesday. Their accounts were simple, factual, no theatrics, no melodrama. But together, they formed a narrative that could not be easily dismissed. I did not want to shame them in public or to break my children's hearts with accusations before I was sure. This was not a day for noise. This was a day for precision. I would not storm the table and scatter them with scandal. Instead, I folded my proof into a plan. Reveal the truth in a way that their own words and documents would do the exposing for me. On the last page of my notebook, I wrote one sentence: wait for the right table. I closed the book and held it to my chest like a prayer. The chair waited. Their confidence swelled. They believed the story was theirs to write. They did not know that I had already begun rewriting it. There will be a dinner soon, I thought, tasting the silence like a spice. And at that dinner, everything they have hidden will be served back to them, piece by piece, with receipts and witnesses, under the light of the very table they stole. And so the days turned into weeks, with me quietly preparing in the shadows. My children and their ambitious wife carried on as if their little empire was secure, never suspecting that I had seen through them all. They thought of me as fragile, defeated, irrelevant, but they forgot one thing: a mother never stops protecting what is hers. I waited for the right moment, the right night when the entire family would once again gather around the table. That same table where they had humiliated me, where I had swallowed my pain in silence. But tonight, silence would no longer be my companion. Tonight, truth would sit at the head of the table. The dinner began like all the others, the daughter-in-law presiding as though she were queen, ordering servants to pour the wine, laughing too loudly at her own clever remarks. My children basked in her charm, blindly praising her, blind to the cracks that only I could see. I sat in my place, quiet but steady, my heart pounding. They had forgotten me, but I had not forgotten them. And when the laughter was at its loudest, when their guard was at its lowest, I finally rose to my feet. My chair scraped across the floor, silencing the room. All eyes turned to me, puzzled, slightly annoyed, as though I had interrupted their performance. "My children," I said, my voice trembling not with fear but with power, "do you know what it feels like to be erased in your own home? To watch the people you raised with your own hands spit on your traditions, your sacrifices, your very love." They shifted uncomfortably. My daughter-in-law smirked, as though she had heard it all before. But that smirk would not last. "Tonight," I continued, my voice steadying, "we will not dine on food. We will dine on truth, and it is bitter." From my shawl, I pulled out a stack of papers, the proof I had quietly gathered. Bank statements, property transfer documents, emails, evidence of their schemes. My daughter-in-law's face paled, her confident mask cracking at the edges. "You thought I did not hear your whispers in the night," I said, locking eyes with her. "You thought I did not know about your plans to seize every last piece of this family's legacy for yourself. But I did. Every lie, every betrayal, I saw it, I felt it. And now so will they." I spread the papers across the table. My children leaned forward, their eyes widening in shock as they read the words, the undeniable evidence of deceit. Their mouths opened, but no words came out. The daughter-in-law tried to speak, her voice sharp and defensive. "This is nonsense, fabricated. She's twisting everything because she's jealous of me." But her trembling hands betrayed her. Her eyes darted from the papers to their faces, searching desperately for support, for anyone to defend her. "None did? You replaced me at this table," I said softly, almost sorrowfully. "But you cannot replace the truth. And the truth is this: you were never here to love this family. You were here to strip it bare, to make it yours, even if it meant destroying the very mother who gave life to your husband." My son's face crumbled, guilt spreading across it like a stain. My daughters bowed their heads in shame. For the first time in months, they could no longer meet my eyes. As for her, the daughter-in-law who had strutted so confidently in my place, her mask shattered completely. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, filled with the weight of betrayal finally unveiled. I slowly sat back down, reclaiming the seat at the head of the table, not with force, but with the unshakable dignity that had always been mine. "This table was never about power," I whispered. "It was about respect. About family, something you were too blind with greed to understand." And in that moment, she was no longer the queen of this household. She was nothing but a stranger caught in the light of her own deceit. My children, ashamed and broken, begged me to forgive them with tearful voices. But I did not answer right away. I simply let the silence speak, the same silence they had once given me when they cast me aside. For the first time in a long while, I felt the strength of my place return. The daughter-in-law's reign was over, and the mother's truth had finally prevailed. The room remained heavy with silence after the truth was laid bare. My children sat frozen, their faces pale with shame, while the daughter-in-law, who once carried herself like a queen, was now trembling, her confidence stripped away like old paint, revealing the rot beneath. For the first time in months, I felt no fear, no uncertainty. I looked around the table that had once been the heart of our family and realized the power it held had never been about a seat, but about the respect that seat represented. My son finally broke the silence, his voice cracking under the weight of guilt. "Mother, I was blind. I let her words poison my heart. I forgot who you are, the woman who raised us, who gave everything for us. I don't know how to undo what I've done." Tears welled in his eyes, and for a moment, I saw the boy he once was, the boy who used to cling to my sorry, the boy who promised he would always protect me when he grew up. My daughters, too, lowered their eyes, tears slipping silently down their cheeks. They whispered apologies, voices trembling, unable to meet my gaze. But my daughter-in-law? She tried one last time to salvage her power. "They may pity you now," she snapped, her voice shaking. "But you can't erase the fact that you're outdated, clinging to traditions that don't matter anymore." "I was only trying to bring this family forward." "Forward?" I interrupted, my voice firm, my eyes locked on hers. "A family that forgets its roots is like a tree without soil. It withers, it collapses. You were never trying to take us forward. You were trying to take everything for yourself." Her words faltered. For the first time, she had no clever reply. My son turned to her then, his jaw tight, his eyes burning with anger and hurt. "Enough, you deceived me. You deceived all of us? This marriage, this love I believed in, you poisoned it with greed. I can't stand by you anymore." The final blow had been struck. She gasped, reaching out to him, but he pulled his hand away. Her reign, her illusions of grandeur, crumbled completely in that moment. Without allies, without her mask, she was nothing more than a stranger in a house she had tried to claim. Slowly, I sat back down at the head of the table. The seat that had once been stolen from me was mine again, not because I demanded it, but because truth restored it. The table, once a place of humiliation, now felt whole again. My children, still weeping, begged for forgiveness. And though the wound they had left in me was deep, I knew that carrying bitterness forever would only scar us all further. "I forgive you," I whispered, "but never forget this night. Respect is not a gift you can throw away when it suits you. It is the foundation of family." Their sobs deepened. And in that moment, I felt the shift. Their eyes finally saw me again. Not as a burden, not as an outdated relic, but as their mother. As for her, the daughter-in-law who had tried to replace me, her end was silent. She left the table with no glory, no power, no respect. Her footsteps echoed down the hallway, a fading reminder of what greed can cost. The candles flickered, the food lay untouched. But something had been restored that night, something greater than tradition, greater than a seat at the head of the table. Dignity, truth, respect. And as I looked at my children, broken yet repentant, I felt peace settle over me. They had strayed, yes, but tonight they had learned. Betrayal may cut deep, but justice, when it comes, heals deeper still. And so I remained at the head of the table, not just in my chair, but in their hearts. Because in the end, no daughter-in-law, no scheme, no betrayal could ever erase a mother's place. Yet as I looked around the table, I knew one thing with certainty. This wound would not heal easily. Respect once broken takes time to restore. But tonight justice had been served. And I, the mother they thought they could erase, had reclaimed my seat not just at the table, but in their hearts, and that, my children, was the greatest victory of all.